Hi everyone, this is the lecture that goes along with Chapter 2 in the Ward text. We're going to talk about building professional relationships. Social workers have relationships with lots of different entities, some of which some of which we're going to talk about here in this lecture, but obviously we have relationships with clients, but we also have relationships with agencies, with supervisors, with people who have other functions inside of agencies, with peers at different agencies, people who do similar kinds of work elsewhere, and that kind of thing. In some ways, the relationships that we have are sort of how the work of our profession gets done. And so it's important to sort of really think actively and carefully about how we build relationships with the different people in our professional network. And that starts obviously with getting to know the people in the agency. So a couple of different places you can look. Certainly one would be to look around as you're sort of walking around the halls and the space of the agencies. You're also going to want to ask questions. In fact, that would be a very appropriate thing to bring to that first those first few supervision sessions. You also can read handbooks, talk with administrative assistants, look for an organizational chart. You can peruse websites as well. I hope it goes without saying, but the administrative assistants at any agency are sort of an integral part of the work, and so they often take care of the kinds of things that sort of help agencies get paid. They process paperwork. They may sort of set up files, things like that. All kinds of really, really important things, and so it's especially important to treat people who are administrative assistants as important people, and with kindness and sort of respect. Relationships with colleagues are keep going too far are sort of also important. You should think about developing relationships with colleagues because they can share professional resources with you. They can alert you to jobs that may be coming up in other organizations, and so they can sort of help you transition out of graduate school and into sort of a professional identity, into a professional setting. So it's really important that we keep our relationships with our colleagues professional. Keep the content sort of focused on work-related things. That doesn't mean you can't be friendly and cordial, but it means there have to be sort of boundaries around those kinds of relationships. Remember to maintain client confidentiality. So we often do discuss clients, particularly if we're consulting with colleagues. And likewise, there may be a time when a person is consulting with you about a particularly tough case. And that's allowed, but remember, that's also a confidential, those conversations are confidential. The relationship with your supervisor is sort of especially important one. They're the ones, like I said last week, they're the ones who sort of connect the learning in the classroom to the activities in the field. And so I hope that your relationship with your supervisor is sort of an especially kind of fulfilling one for you in the journey. Your faculty liaison is me. Keep going too far. Your faculty liaison is me, and I'm here to liaise primarily between you and the agency and the school, the university. But if need be, I'm available to mediate any significant problems that happen between you and your supervisor, or you and you and the agency. Now, these problems are rare, thankfully, and they're rare as they should be. My recommendation is always to attempt to sort out issues first, and part of that has to do with sort of what's useful for learning, and part of that has to do with sort of where my role is a little bit limited. If if you want, and you're having, if you're having trouble with sort of a supervisor or an agency or something like that, if you want to consult with me about what you should talk with them, that's perfectly fine as well. In fact, you could do that and then attempt to resolve any issues with the liaison or with the agency before I became sort of involved formally. And then, of course, we should talk for a little bit about for a few minutes about relationships with clients. Oops. Clients sort of require the very best relationship skills that we have. And as I said a few minutes ago, those relationships, that's the use of self. That's what helps clients change and sort of get their needs met. It's important to be genuine. It's important to be sort of true to who you are, and that means showing warmth and empathy in this thing we call genuineness. It also means being honest most of the time. Now, I understand that this can get sort of tricky sometimes because clients are often revealing things about themselves to us, and the temptation is for us to reveal things about them, or for us to reveal things about ourselves to them. If that made sense as I stumble through my words here. And this is really where sort of that idea of boundaries come in. We are warm, we are empathic, we are genuine, but a relationship with the client is really one-sided. We're there in service of the client's needs. The client is never there in service of our needs. It's important that you understand that now, and it's important that you sort of respect and honor the nature of that relationship sort of throughout the field placement. So this is sort of what I this is sort of written out in bullet points, what I said here a second ago. Clients are not friends, although we are friendly with them, and we do relate to them with warmth and honesty and genuineness, but we also relate to them professionally. Self-disclosure is mentioned in the third bullet point here on the screen, and there's a good chance that the agency is going to have some kind of policy or at least guideline around the use of self-disclosure. A good sort of way to approach self-disclosure is that it's rarely appropriate. It is occasionally appropriate to disclose something very benign, for like I love pepperoni on my pizza, or I have a pet dog named Fido or something like that. But it's never appropriate to disclose sort of our own histories with substance abuse or trauma or anything else. The relationship sort of with clients is really one that's used to form a spirit of mutual trust and respect, and that's partially why sort of self-disclosure is something we shy away from, and why in general we relate professionally to our clients. You should be aware of your nonverbal behavior and your body language. Sometimes, depending on the setting, agencies have ways to record sessions and things like that. But we should be aware of sort of how our faces can communicate things that are either consistent or inconsistent with what our language is communicating, and we should sort of endeavor to make sure our body language is supporting our verbal language as well. And so developing that awareness, or developing sort of that knowledge of how we make other people feel is something called sort of self-awareness, and it's something we develop through sort of a self-evaluation, actively thinking about sort of our presence and how our behavior sort of comes across. Another good sort of heuristic is the what's mentioned in the last bullet point here: once a client, always a client. There are certain ethical provisions. Sometimes agencies have guidelines that either are consistent or in conflict with sort of our professional code of ethics, but clients, once they are in our lives as a client, they are sort of always in our lives. That's true whether you see someone, the same day at the grocery store, or whether you see them 10 years later at the grocery store. Once they're a client, they're always a client, and we have to sort of regard them as such. Occasionally, there are field placements where the client is the community, and in that case, the sort of same standards apply that we've been talking about here in the last couple of minutes. Boundaries are important, but you're still going to use the same sort of social work skills to help a community change instead of help an individual change. The thing that can be really tough, sort of when the client is the community, is this thing here at the bottom: once a client, always a client, and that kind of comes to light in dual relationships. So dual relationships are when you have maybe a professional relationship and a personal relationship with someone, or you have two different kinds of professional relationships with someone. If that happens, reach out to me and let's talk about it, or talk about it with your supervisor. In general, we should avoid dual relationships. That's really hard to do in some small communities or rural communities or some really isolated communities. And so if that happens, we should probably think about how to negotiate that one-on-one. So there's a couple of sort of elements of relationship building. One is cultural sensitivity. Another one is trust. And in some ways, trust is sort of the foundation of all relationships. Another sort of foundation of relationship building is really dependability and consistency, and that sort of following through on what it is you're going to say, being there on time for appointments and client sessions and things like that, dressing appropriately, communicating with the agency if you're sick or late, and sort of being actively and genuinely interested in the work of the agency, and sort of demonstrating that you're trying to integrate your experiences into your growth as a student. So I will conclude things there. As always, if you have questions, feel free to get in touch with me or post online. Thanks for watching.